Rahul Gandhi has accused India's election system of being compromised, alleging that voter rolls across multiple constituencies were rigged to tilt the balance of power. Thousands of duplicate names, non-existent addresses, and entire clusters of voters registered to single, cramped dwellings. In some cases, elderly citizens, well into their 70s or 80s, were recorded as if they were first-time voters barely out of their teens. The implication is direct. If these allegations hold, they point to a deliberate manipulation of electoral rolls, one that could, in theory, alter the outcome of a tightly contested election. Protests have already spilled onto the streets, with marches, vigils, and rallies calling for the cleansing of voter lists. Yet the story is more complex than it first appears. According to the allegation, many individuals appear more than once in the rolls, sometimes even registered in different states. On paper, this looks damning. But voter lists are massive, constantly updated databases, and duplication is a known technical problem. Minor variations in spelling can lead to entries being treated as separate voters. People who move from one constituency to another may remain on the rolls of their old address if the deletion request is delayed or lost in processing. Clerical errors during data entry can also create the appearance of a duplicate where none exists. Internationally, electoral rolls in countries with high internal migration, like the United States, Brazil, and Indonesia, also experience duplicate entries. Most are the result of outdated information rather than intentional manipulation. None of these explanations rule out deliberate wrongdoing, but they do show that duplication alone is not conclusive proof of fraud. One of the most striking claims is of dozens, sometimes even 80, voters registered at the same small dwelling. In the abstract, that suggests something deeply suspicious. But in many parts of urban India, high-density housing is normal. Migrant labor camps, student hostels, and shared dormitories can house large numbers of adults who share the same official address. Election law allows such residents to remain registered there as long as they live in that facility. There is also the possibility of address consolidation, where the voter roll lists a single property as the registration point, even if it actually represents a cluster of adjoining structures. Without on-ground verification, numbers on a sheet of paper can be misleading. The phenomenon is not unique to India. In Singapore, for example, some government-registered housing blocks list hundreds of voters under one address, simply because each apartment shares the same postal code in the roll. The allegation of fake addresses, properties that supposedly don't exist, sounds like a smoking gun. But this too can have explanations unrelated to fraud. In rapidly growing cities, property records often lag behind reality. What was an empty plot a year ago could now be an informal housing block with dozens of tenants. Conversely, buildings may be demolished but remain on outdated lists, leaving the appearance of ghost addresses. In rural areas, addresses can be descriptive rather than formal, near the banyan tree or opposite the temple, which may not match official land records even though the residents are real. One particularly eye-catching statistic is the registration of elderly citizens, aged 70 or 80, as if they were first-time voters aged 18 to 23. This is unusual, but again, it may not always be intentional fraud. Data entry operators sometimes default to a current year when an age is missing, automatically generating a young voter profile. Similarly, conversion of handwritten records into digital format can cause age fields to be mistranscribed. Such mistakes are embarrassing for the credibility of the rolls, but they are a known byproduct of large-scale digitization projects worldwide. Another argument is that multiple BJP victories came with very small margins, suggesting coordinated tampering. But Indian elections have a long history of razor-thin wins and losses across all parties. In previous decades, seats have been decided by a single vote. In 2004, dozens of constituencies were won with margins under 10,000 votes while Congress was in power. In 2008, a senior Congress leader lost by just one vote. Tight margins are a recurring feature of India's competitive politics. They are not proof in themselves of wrongdoing. Globally, democracies from the UK to Australia have seen similarly narrow results without defaulting to fraud claims. The real test is whether proper counting procedures were followed, not how wide or narrow the margin was. Suspicion has also been cast on elections being held in multiple phases. But phased polling has existed since the first general election in 1951 to 52, which took place in 68 phases over 4 months. Even in 2004, voting was spread over 7 phases. The primary reason is logistical, to manage security forces and polling staff in a country of continental scale. Far from being a modern manipulation tool, phased polling is a feature of India's electoral design from the very beginning. Some allegations point to a suspicious increase in evening voting, but Election Commission figures show the opposite trend. The hourly voting rate typically declines after 5 p.m., often by 40 to 50%. This is consistent with the rule that anyone in line at 5 p.m. can vote, many of whom are workers or students casting their ballots after the day's commitments. A smaller evening voting rate is a sign of routine voter flow, not irregularity. Even if every irregularity listed were true, one question remains. Why was this not raised earlier? Opposition parties receive copies of the voter rolls well in advance of an election. If the irregularities were so blatant and widespread, why did public accusations emerge only after the results were known? The answer could be procedural delays in verification, or it could be that the narrative serves a political purpose at this particular moment. Accusations of a stolen election can rally supporters, sow doubt among undecided voters, and shape the political conversation ahead of the next national contest. Allegations of electoral irregularities are not new to India. Over the decades, disputes about voter lists, ballot security, and counting procedures have surfaced after nearly every major election. In most cases, these disputes fade once official inquiries are completed, or when the political momentum behind them dissipates. The Election Commission of India is, on paper, one of the most powerful electoral bodies in the world. It maintains the rolls, supervises polling, and has the legal authority to investigate complaints. But like any large institution, its credibility depends on public trust. When that trust is challenged, especially by prominent political figures, the damage is not limited to one election cycle. Internationally, such disputes are resolved through independent audits and transparent publication of voter data. In countries with large mobile populations, errors in voter rolls are acknowledged as inevitable, but they are separated from deliberate fraud through field verification, cross-checking with national databases, and, in some cases, bipartisan oversight panels. India's own process includes mechanisms for claims and objections, allowing citizens to verify or challenge entries in the electoral roll months before an election. But these mechanisms rely on active participation and on political parties engaging with the process early. If errors are only raised after results are declared, they risk being perceived less as administrative issues and more as political weapons. In this case, the claims point to patterns that, if proven, would be serious. But without forensic investigation on the ground, the same data could also be explained by routine errors in a database of over 900 million voters. Distinguishing between the two is the work of auditors, not politicians. The broader question goes beyond any one leader or party. How does a democracy handle accusations that cut to its core? Silence breeds suspicion, but unverified claims can erode faith in the system just as effectively as proven wrongdoing. The solution lies in independent, methodical verification, backed by the will to accept the findings, whatever they reveal. Until then, the truth remains suspended between political charge and documented fact. That is why the final decision does not rest with politicians or institutions alone. It rests with you, the citizens of India. You are the guardians of the Republic, and only you can decide whether its foundation will remain unshakable or be left vulnerable to doubt. So, read, question, verify, participate. Whether you stand in line to vote, file a complaint, or simply engage in an informed debate, every action strengthens democracy's spine. Because in the end, a free and fair India is not just a promise on paper, it is a duty we all share.